Namani, which is hello in Ghana. I'm Jackie Wurm, the COTA SA Project Officer for the Rainbow Hub. Working with LGBTI people aged 50 plus and our allies. And thanks to Feast Festival and Office for Ageing Well to supporting this event. One of my roles with COTA SA is leading the Rainbow Horizons project to promote discussion about end-of-life care, dying and planning, and how we might best do that as a community. What might an LGBTI compassionate community look like? Can we come up with a model that others may also draw on? Welcome to Don't Leave Me This Way, honouring our lives in community. To our guests, Alana, Valentine and Christos Tsiolkas. To familiar faces and anyone who's new to the Rainbow Hub, welcome. I acknowledge we're meeting here overlooking the beautiful Parawirikari, the Torrens River, on Kaurna country, where First Nations people have been meeting and yarning for thousands of years. I also take this opportunity to acknowledge the LGBTI people who've come before us, to all of you in the room who contributed to law reform and other gains and just been your fabulous selves, because in the face of what seems like endless condemning of our love, I think that's one of the best ways to stand strong. This part of the river also has particular significance for our community. Not far from here was the site of the death of Dr. Duncan 50 years ago. The Oratorio Watershed, the death of Dr. Duncan, has its world premiere at the Adelaide Festival this week. It was co-commissioned by Feast Festival, Adelaide Festival and State Opera SA. We've taken advantage of the presence in Adelaide of co-librettists Christos and Alana to have this conversation. Alana is a playwright and director with over 20 published works. Staged Australia-wide and internationally, they include Savage Grace, which first premiered in Feast here in 2000, as well as Letters to Lindy and many others. In 2021, she wrote and directed the Sydney Festival Walkley's award-winning series, The Journalist Gene. Alana also works as a dramaturg with Bangarra Dance Theatre and has co-written with Stephen Page, Wujang, Not the Past, which is another much anticipated Adelaide Festival show. Alana's based in New South Wales, in case the print doesn't give that away. We knew each other in the 80s when we both lived in Sydney through exhilarating and challenging times, attending some of the same dance parties as well as going to too many of the same funerals due to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Christos has written 7 novels, including Loaded, Damascus, and most recently 7.5. Head On became a feature film, and The Slap was also translated to the screen as a mini-series in Australia and the US. He too has garnered many awards, including the 2021 Melbourne Literature Prize. Christos is also a playwright, essayist and screenwriter, lives in Melbourne and is a guest of Adelaide Writers' Week. He spent several months living in Adelaide in the 1980s. 1985. So please welcome them to this beautiful setting. The Rainbow Horizons project is encouraging us to proactively prepare so we don't leave our friends and loved ones in a way where they are unsure of people's wishes or unable to facilitate them because they can be overridden by biological family or the medical profession, for example. Rather than just talk about advanced care directives, although they're important, and there's more information about that and ageing well up the back. I thought it would be inspiring to talk about some of the bigger themes in life and through a more creative lens, hence this forum. I'm aware that we're covering some quite emotional material and ask if you would look out for each other and stay afterwards for a drink. So let's get the ball rolling. Firstly, turning to creative ways that we can honour LGBTI lives, including years lost in the closet. Can you both talk about how you've approached this in creating Watershed, the death of Dr. Duncan, including a hero who wouldn't have wanted to be a hero? Maybe Alana, you can... Oh.
Go.
Do you want me to take the microphone? Or, oh yes, of course, it's on here. Very quick. Look, I think that first of all, we should deal with this question of whether Dr. Duncan would have wanted an oratorio about him, because you've just referred to it. I respect that as a perspective that Tim has, and Tim Reeves has been an amazing historical consultant to this work. But both Christos and I have discussed the fact that one of the great tragedies of Duncan's life is that we didn't get to see, and he didn't get to see, what was coming after that. Exactly. And whether that might have changed who he was and how his own relation to his queerness, his gayness. And I always said that, you know, the fact of having been thrown in the Torrens and murdered may have changed his mind as well, you know, without being kind of flippant about it. So I respect that as a point of view, but I also believe that what we've tried to do is honour him. We call it an oratorio, but really it's a requiem.
Yes.
In so many ways. And I just want to say two things. First is that Christos and I talked a lot about not making this work about the politicians and the cops, even though there are a lot of there are police and politicians in the work. We really wanted to raise up SA Gay, you know, and we wanted to raise up the incredible heroism of the gay and lesbian and trans community at that time. In fact, I found we were lucky to be welcomed to South Australia by both Tim and Will, who is among us, and I found a beautiful photo. I just went and asked Will, there's a great photo you will all know that's blatant is beautiful, and it's a picture of Will. And yeah, we've sort of taken that as an incredible act of courage in 1972, and the show features that. The other thing that happened recently, Christos and I were being interviewed by The Guardian, and the journalist said, oh, it's really sad that, do you think it's sad that none of Duncan's family will be there on the night? And I said, what are you talking about? We are all his family. Yeah. We are his family, and we will be there. So yeah, I think that's how I'd answer your question.
Yes, I mean, Alana's very eloquently expressed what we look. The taking on of this response. So what happens as a writer is, you know, approached by Neil Armfield, Adelaide Festival Feast, and Feast are central to this work, and I was aware of how big a story it was, but there's that part of me that goes, I just so want to work with this woman, I just so want to work with this group of people, so I'm going to leap into it. The being in Adelaide I was 19 when I just turning 20 when I came to this city, fallen in love. I came here with my partner. We got this place in Richmond, like this little flat, and I've talked about this, and it's absolutely true. I remember going to the Colonel Light, and in that first night, just hanging out with people, getting to know the city, people told me just to be careful when you go down to the river. So I heard, I may not have heard Duncan's name, but I heard about the history of violence in this city, and I'd known that from my own life. I'd heard about don't trust the cops beat us up. So that awareness, that responsibility of telling this story was really, really important to all of us. And it was a glorious day when I first met this Alana and sat down at her place and with Vicky and just talking about what we wanted to do and being excited about ideas and excited about possibilities, but also wanting to do two things, which is to do a requiem. Yes, it's an oratorio, but it is also to say this man, this terrible murder. So he didn't get a chance to see where gay liberation led. He didn't get a chance to maybe fall in love or have a variety of experiences that would have transformed him and changed his life. He didn't get to do any of that because he was murdered, just down here, and that's. We did not take that responsibility lightly. And the other thing is to just say that, you know, I came out in the 80s, but I came out because of a whole range of work that activists had done for a really long time. And I think for Alana and I, that awareness and that was another responsibility we had, to actually celebrate that. And yes, the cops are in Watershed, the politicians are in Watershed, because that is part of the story we want to tell. But for both of us, the activists were the that's the celebration we wanted to do. Because that's what's made her and I and you, that's what's made it possible for us to be here tonight.
Now, how do we strengthen our rainbow community as we age, younger and older, side by side? This question arose early in COVID-19 when our Rainbow Hub started thinking about how to support people who live alone and might get sick, or maybe you have a partner but they may be unwell also, or choose not to be your carer. Who are you going to call? Have you prepared your funeral playlist or one for the wake? We'll put a link on our website to the one we've prepared for tonight, so you can get some inspiration. I've since heard it takes 16 people to support someone towards the end of their life, including carers, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, maybe spiritual figures. Who'll cook, who will clean, who'll drive you around, and who'll be your advocate, who might be on your team. Christos, you describe beautifully in Dead Europe the tenderness of a lover, Colin, caring for his partner Isaac, together with mother Rebecca, when Isaac is close to death in hospital. Elsewhere in your writing, you don't shy away from the messiness of life and our often ambivalent feelings and reactions towards caring for others. What's important for cross-generational connection?
I was actually thinking just before, the awareness of being on Ghana land, and one of the things, I had a friend when I was younger in school, and he is Indigenous, and one commonality we found was, mine coming from a Greek background, my parents were immigrants from Greece to this country, was that we both use the words auntie and uncle to describe a whole range of people that weren't necessarily blood relations. That, you know, in Greek you say theo and thea, and that was a mark of respect that you paid to elders. And, you know, my mate had that within his community in Melbourne, and I think that is something that I learned from within my heritage. And though I had to do a lot of breaking away from that heritage, because it was not necessarily easy for my parents and my family to accept me being gay, because they didn't have the language for it. They were just terrified of what that would mean. I think that sense of respect for across generations has been really important to me, to try and to understand, and why I think that thing I said about activists is crucial to our relationship to Watershed, is to go, yes, I could turn away from my folks and their generation and say you're homophobic, or your gender politics are really not mine. but to also go, well, you came from particular spaces which were, I have no idea what that would be like, to grow up in World War II, to grow up in a civil war, to carry the body of your sibling because they've been killed in a vicious civil war, the poverty they face, to come across the world on a ship for 40 days and 2 days later start work in a factory in a place that you don't know the language. It feels like I owe a respect to that heritage that is really, really important. What has been absolutely wonderful in that trajectory of my life is just think this is what happens now. And my mum was really sick for a long period last year, and it was terrible over COVID, and we came close to losing her, and I couldn't go into hospital. We had to talk on the phone. But one of the things she said that carried her through was her grandchild bringing her up and talking to her. And my niece is a really proud member of the drag and trans communities. And I'm so in awe of her. She teaches me so much. And she teaches my mother so much. And it's that relationship between the generations that I think is absolutely crucial to getting to that empathy that you were talking about, Jackie. I think in my writing, I don't think there isn't black and white. People don't have black hats and white hats. Things are complicated, and I think listening to across generations makes you realise how complicated things are.
Building on that, Alana. Sorry. You're very encouraging of young people generally, but you describe as them leading us into a dynamic future in your book, Bowerbird, The Art of Making Theatre Drawn from Life. How do we better engage with younger community members and pass on our experience as activists and those skills, as well as hear their perspectives?
Well, I find that the best way to engage with young people is to dress well. You laugh, and I wanted you to laugh, of course. But I think that one of the things about being a lesbian, getting older, is that you're kind of triple times invisible. And so I am very decorative in my fashion choices. And look, I really do find that young people will cross a foyer and come up to me and say, I really love what you're wearing. And it's just a way to literally start conversations. I love young artists. I think they're really exciting. It's been a great honour for me to have a couple of plays on the HSC syllabus in New South Wales, which means that I go to schools and I get to hear from young writers all the time, and I say to them, and I really believe this, that they actually have things to tell me that I won't understand unless I see them in a theatre. And what I mean by that is that some of us go through life and we understand the world or enter the world by reading or by or by playing sport or whatever. I understand life when I see it played out on a stage. When I actually, and I can actually even understand something about my life that I might have gone through, but when I see it on a stage, I go, that's what it was. That is what it was. And it's to do with, I don't know, the way the playwright compresses time, the way cause and effect works in theatre where it doesn't in life. So I suppose the answer I would give you is that I encourage I say to them, you have things to say that I don't even know what they are, and I won't understand them unless you find a way to express it. And so I have written a book about it. Young adults love the form I work in, which is often verbatim, or like I call it close work, where I work a lot with oral history and communities of interest, because they kind of enter it and they feel like they can do it. It feels reachable to them. So yeah, look, I think that's the way I would answer you. It's all good, it's all good.
Is that a bit of wildlife, I think?
Wildlife. Yeah.
Thank you. Christos, you write in 7.5, we live in an age estranged from the world. We live in our heads and we live in our screens. In this digital age and COVID times where we bump up against each other less in gay venues, on the dance floor or elsewhere, how can we better bridge some of these divides?
I was just talking to someone outside, and something I've been thinking about for a while. So when I was just starting coming out and going out into the scene, there was this older man, John, who lived in Fitzroy in the inner city in Melbourne. So this is a time just before gentrification was becoming changing the neighbourhoods that I lived in. And John was this absolutely generous gay man who opened his house to us young lesbians and gay men, and said, this is he didn't use this phrase, but I guess this is what he did when I look back on it. This is a safe place. You can come here and you can read my books and you can listen to my music. And he had a great music collection. And the thing he did that I thought was astonishing even back then, so we're talking 82, is he didn't have a telephone. And he said, if you want to contact me, you either knock on my door or you write me a letter, because there's a form of communication that I believe in. And that, I think that has stayed with me decades on, and is kind of in 7.5, even though I don't mention John, who has sadly passed away now, by name. I think I am grateful for a technology that lets me contact a friend in Europe or in the Americas and find out how they're doing. That's an astonishing thing, I know that. But I really miss the one-on-one conversations with people or a group of people. That's what has been hard with COVID and the pandemic, is to be able to have those intimate conversations, because that's how we learn, that's how we understand things. And I also think part of why I wrote 7.5 is that there is, unless you're a complete arsehole, there's actually going to be a civility, a respect across the table that you can argue, and if you're arguing in good faith, you don't always have to agree. Then you can have conversations that are difficult, because life is difficult. Things are complicated and there are a lot of contradictions, and I guess I worry a bit that ability to have those arguments of good faith is becoming harder in our time. I had a magic moment on Wednesday night because of the pandemic, and I caught up with a group of friends, and some of them I hadn't seen for over a quarter century. So when I was, again, I'm talking about, this tonight has made me think about youth, because I'm no longer youth at all, far from it. But I had joined a group called Greek Progressive Youth, which was an arm, believe it or not, of the Greek Communist Party in Australia. I met some wonderful people, some of them who are still some of my greatest friends through that, but a lot of people, lives went in separate ways, and someone had just got on the phone, and again, the technology, and had contacted everyone and said, let's meet up on Wednesday night. And I was around a table with people, some who I have not seen for close to 3 decades when I think about it, and we were able to argue and laugh and argue and laugh, and I think that's really important for me. I think because you're not going to have an opportunity to actually have that cross-generational conversation and that cross-generational empathy. I think if you don't have that intimacy of, and that's not to be a Luddite and that's not to condemn technology, but it's to say that I think that if there's something for me that I want to do more of is have those conversations in real time, in real place.
Yeah, so nice to be here face to face, I must say. Turning to what's important as we approach our latter lives, Alana, you can comment on you can each comment on these questions obviously as well, but I'm really struck by the way you often embed yourself in community, the way you were just describing a bit about, to give voice and reflect back complexity and dilemmas. You also talk about the arts as offering valuable ways of building community and instilling resilience in young adults as well as the general population. How have you found this has changed over the last generation or so?
Yeah, so just quickly, my mother had me when she was, she got pregnant at 17, had me when she was 18, which in those days apparently was quite common. But it meant that I was raised by my grandmother, and my grandmother was sort of the one who, when I first came out to someone, it was to my grandmother, and I was terrified that she would reject me because she was sort of my main source of love. And my grandmother died in 1988, and then my mother died 5 years later, sort of 3 days short of her 50th birthday. So one of the things that has really informed my life is a sort of longing for female elders. And I've written a play called Parramatta Girls, which is about women who were incarcerated in, well, it was a very well-known state home in Sydney. But you will know that those homes were all around Australia. I'm sure they were in South Australia as well. They were both run by the state and by private companies, charities. And the women who went through them are mostly extremely damaged. There was a lot of sexual abuse, but not just that. There was psychological abuse, and they were for girls and boys, but I was writing about girls between the ages of sort of 14, 15 up to about 19. So, one of the things that happened when I wrote that play, lots of women came out of the woodwork and told me their stories. They told me, even if they didn't go there, that they were threatened with going there. It was a generational thing. And as I started talking about it at schools, I said, look, I was really interested in the history. I was really interested in it, that it was a place where Indigenous and non-Indigenous women kind of were equally denigrated in some sense, although it was really complex, as you say. An Aboriginal woman said to me, there was no black and white, there was only black and blue, which is just a fantastic sort of thing to say. So I was interested in that sort of space, but also I had to admit that one of the reasons why I did the play was because I just wanted to hang out with a whole lot of really tough, love old women, and because a play takes you about 5 years usually. So it's really interesting, and Christos will have had this experience that you don't always know when you're attracted to a subject why it is. It kind of gradually revealed itself to me that really I just missed the kind of brutal. I came from a very a working class background, so I was used to sort of a form of abuse being a kind of love, and that was the sort of women they were as well. And I suppose the answer to your question, Jackie, is that since then I have really found myself seeking out older role models. I go to an art class in the Waterloo Housing Project in Sydney, and it's run by an 83-year-old woman who has a little dog called Lambert, that's right, and Vicky, my partner, remembers better than me. But it's kind of really interesting, and she's just this fabulous, cranky, gifted artist who says things to me like, oh, I stopped going to that print class because they were just so relentlessly optimistic. And she said, oh, and they're always talking about love is the answer. She said, there's not a lot of love in the world, and when you find it, it's fabulous. But, you know, don't expect it around with every relationship. And so I suppose I've been, you know, really serious about, I realised when I kind of got to 50 that I thought, I just don't know how to be after that when you don't have a role model who shows you. So I suppose my best answer is, yeah, find the fabulous, funky LGBT people and hang on to them, you know, and age with them. So, yeah, that's my answer.
It's made me think, just listening to you, Alana, that really I owe so much to a mentorship relationship that wasn't even it wasn't never professional, but, you know, I've talked about John. I remember a wonderful drag artist, Michael Michelle, and I love music. I wish I was a musician because but man, they had the best record collection in the world, and Michael Michelle introduced me to jazz and sat me down and said, this is how you're going to listen. I owe the fact that I am published today to a man called Sasha Soldatov, who was a terrific Sydney-based writer, and he took a punt. I'd loved his first book, and I sent him a collection of short stories, and Sasha being Sasha went, 3 of these are absolute bullshit, but one of them is really good. But he took my hand, and I knew nothing about the writing world, I knew nothing about the publishing, and he walked me through it. And I think those mentorship relationships are really important.
Yeah.
I was thinking too about when you said that about stories. I think one of the reasons, Jackie, that again I worry about my own, you know, why I do put the phone down, is that to hear the story, you do actually need sometimes to be in quiet. Like I've got to, you know, every day I begin with a walk, and that walk is about trying to hear the stories that, you know, because stories come from our past, they come from an observation, they come from, I may see something today that's going to become a story, but if you're only in the digital world, you just can't hear it, you know.
Can you talk a bit more about one of your themes, and you touched on it earlier, the double-edged sword of community, where potentially a great source of support, but also of judgment, and which can lead us to trapping ourselves in isolation, or, you know, isolating ourselves, and that's, you know, something that we try and counter in our community building.
I'm going to talk about, I mean, because I talked about kind of growing up in a Greek family, and I think that's a good way to maybe make a translation to what happens in our communities. I hope it's all right, I'm going to use the word queer just because it's an easier, you know, in queer communities. So I felt like I had to run away from my Greek community and my Greekness to become the gay man I am, because I didn't know how it felt like I wasn't, it wasn't just possible, it just wasn't possible to be gay in that world. And, you know, I was talking about it, Greek Progressive Youth, I'm not making this up, right? So I'm 17 and my friend and I are leaky. We decide to form a gay and lesbian subcommittee within Greek Progressive Youth, right? I'm not making this up. So we go and we have to go to the Central Committee. So we go into this little meeting hall, and there are 7 people around the table, and Aliki and I explained that we think that it would be great if this organisation had an arm, you know, a group that would support gay and lesbian young people. And they said, they listened to us, and then they said, can you leave for 10 minutes? We're going to have a discussion about it. We came back in 10 minutes, and they went, homosexuality is a bourgeois deviation. Once capitalism is replaced by communists, you will find yourself heterosexual. You won't be, you know, it's the perversity of the economic system. So that, I was like, okay, not even the Greek left is going to let me be gay. I turned away. I moved out of home quite early. Which was quite difficult for my mum and dad. They came from a very tight family world, but they never abandoned me, and I never abandoned them. And I felt that connection was really important in terms of kind of keeping me sane and keeping me grounded. And I think I've used the same understanding sometimes in the gay world, you know, that sometimes in terms of class, in terms of language, in terms of ethnicity, I felt like I've been arguing, you know, banging my head against a brick wall sometimes to make fellow queers understand things, but I've never let go of the connection. And then you find in time that things move, things change, and I think we all do that in various ways. We all move in and out of our communities because we are not one thing, right? We are complexity. Now that I am 56, I feel like I am bound to my queer community, and I'm bound to my Greek community, and I'm bound to a whole range of communities, and that's really, that keeps me sane, that keeps me solid. I think you do need to have times of excluding yourself and then coming back in, because not every, the complexity of who we are is not going to be answered by one community, but in time you realise that you can actually live amongst communities. You know, and that's a great thing. That's a wonderful thing, because in that moving between the communities, they're beginning to talk to each other, and they're forming communities within communities. I think that's wonderful, but we shouldn't be scared of that.
Yeah, I mean, Jackie, you talk about disapproval in communities. I mean, I look at the sort of worry about cancel culture these days, and I want to say, darling, you should have gone through, you know, being a lesbian in the 80s, man. Like, you know, this is nothing compared to what that was like. You know, I think that there can always, but you play the long game. I mean, you know, like it's beautiful and it's complex and it's dysfunctional, and what we have strive to do, both of us in our writing, I think, is show that there's not one kind of lesbian or one kind of gay man. And I think that that's the big change that I've seen in my lifetime, that the stereotypes of what a lesbian is very different now. There is some more complexity, and I think that our community also you know, have contributed to that, because so many more people have come out. Whereas, you know, the research we were doing about, you know, those times, I mean, it was the brave like Will, who literally led the way, and it was a very, very difficult thing to do. And I think for women as well, I think because it was never illegal, there's this kind of idea, well, that was never hard then. And it's like, that's just such a lie. And I feel like, you know, both of our writing tries to address those lies that the mainstream don't kind of understand. But, I mean, all communities, like exactly what Christos is saying, all communities are like that. They fight with each other. They disapprove of each other, and they have rules about who's in and who's out. And you just have to remember that you are, I mean, I think one of the things about ageing too is that we stop hating the parts of ourselves that aren't acceptable to our community.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and realising that the stereotypes are in our own heads as well.
Yeah.
That when I look back, I think I was really unforgiving about some people, and I thought that they were racist, or I thought they were misogynist, or I thought they were scolding or a whole heap of things. But when I think back, actually, no, they were trying to work it out, and I wasn't being very patient. I think maybe it took me a long. I know Alana can probably testify to that. I'm still struggling with patience, but I think that is a real, in its positive, I think patience gives you generosity as well, because it's going, okay, I'm not going to stick with my first impression or my stereotype that you are. I see you, and I'm going to tick you off as this person, which means you're not going to understand a series of things. I'm actually going to spend the time and get to know you. And maybe you're an arsehole. I get to know you're an arsehole, but maybe I get to know that you're actually much more complex than that first impression.
Alana, in Bowerbird, you remember your friend and writer Michael Gurr when you're washing the veggies for dinner, and I quote, "My hands muddy with a mix of potato, dirt and water, my eyes clouded with the pain of his passing. But I do what I often do with my grief. I will fold my memories of him up inside me and think of him and speak to him when I need to conjure him back into being." End of quote. Can you talk a bit more about making room for grief in our lives?
Oh yes, I've had a lot of grief. I'm sure everyone in this room has had a lot of grief. The funerals you talked about, of course, but I've obviously also said my mother and grandmother. I've had other very close losses that I won't talk about. But yeah, look, I think that loss is a part of life. I guess that's when you do speak to old people, old women, they talk about losing friends and the fear of that. Making space for grief. I think what I want to underline is making space for relationships, like what Christos says. I guess it was really great that you read out that about Michael Gurr, because I only met him, I think once or even twice. We went to a writers' conference, like a writers, what are they called?
Retreat.
No, when they all sit around and talk about books and playwrights just go, oh, we're here too. What are they called? Writers' Weeks.
Yeah.
Writers' Festivals, there we go. And I met him and we got on very fast. For those of you who don't know, Michael Gurr was an extraordinary Melbourne playwright, highly political.
Wonderful man.
And he beat me a couple of times at the New South Wales State Literary Awards. So I'm sure that's what my real interest in him was. But I met him and I got on with him really fast, and we talked about that, and I said, darling, I've spent my life with gay men in Sydney. If I can't get on with a queen, I've really wasted my life, But I loved him. I loved him dearly. I guess it's that thing of, like we do in Watershed, we've tried, I think that this community uniquely holds pain and grief in a kind of joyful ecstasy, because we've had so much of it. I mean, clearly First Nations people have their own, as well. But I think that the lesbian, gays and transgender people, grief is just a common everyday thing. And I just really believe that we actually have something quite special to say to the world about how to grieve, to not actually go down into the pain of it. You sent us that email about the exhibition that's on about fashion designers during HIV and AIDS, and I'm like, yes, that's what you do. You find a way to celebrate. And what's been joyful about this collaboration on Watershed with Christos is exactly that. We never let go of the profound, you can see Christos is so passionate about life, and so am I, and we've just put that into the work, even when we're in pain about the tragedy or in rage. We have sat around being infuriated by what happened in this story. And I actually wanted to remind myself, you talked about young people. One of the first things we did when we came to this city was go to the memorial at the University of Adelaide. There, I knew you'd know. And there were these young people from the queer club or the you know, and they just were so passionate about Duncan and what it meant, and we literally came away from that and went, oh wow, this is so deep in the DNA of this city, and every queer person in this city. So yeah, those young people had a profound effect on the writing of this work.
Yeah,
I've got to tell you, we were blown away by their passion. Yeah.
Actually, to think about what art can do, I remember a few months ago, you know, the English series It's a Sin that was set in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic, and my niece ringing me up in tears, howling, going, I didn't know, you know, because that's what that series did, was it opened a window to a really young person to go, who's heard about things, who's heard her uncle talk about these things, but, you know, to see it represented, to see it emotionally communicated through the moving image is something different. And I said, Caitlin, that's what it was. But don't also forget that they used the song The Pet Shop Boys, right? Because when you were talking about grief, and something that our community knows about grief, because we have experienced so much about it, is I said, you know, that you're sobbing because of the loss and the bloody homophobia that often accompanied that loss back in the 80s and early 90s. But there's also the nights that you would go out after the funeral and something like Candy Staten's The Source, You've Got the Love is playing, and you were sobbing and dancing and it being exhilarated at the same time. You know, and I don't think it's an accident that, you know, that euphoric house music came out of our experiences, the experiences of so many queer people in that decade, because we, you know, that it was an absolute sadness and an absolute defiance as well, and not forgetting joy, not forgetting that that's part of why we are who we are, why we're all sitting at this table, is because we love our sexuality and we love you know, I want to be in the body with the men I love. I want, you know, that's just as important as anything, and that's what I think is something that we should never lose sight of. You know, that euphoria is part of our experience, because that's the euphoria that often gets excluded or condemned or imprisoned and talking about what happened to Duncan and what happened to the whole group of people just down here, because it wasn't only Duncan. That's why they were killed, because of their sexuality, and in grief, I think it's really important as communities we find ways of coming to terms with grief, because it is really, really hard to do. And what are the rituals that we have? And because I really, Damascus, one of my novels, which is about the early Christian church, even before it had the name Christianity, I really wanted to go back there because I had felt the exclusion of the sacred for being queer, that you somehow are exiled from a notion of God. And really, across culture, across history, it's been the religions that have had the rituals for grief. Now, I don't think you need religion to have those rituals, but I do think you need rituals. And dancing, being amongst a group of people, mourning someone, but shouting your lungs out to a song on the dance floor is a ritual. I remember when I'm a good friend of Dennis Altman's, and when his partner unfortunately passed away, I said, because my father had not long gone, and I had this ritual where I went to the cemetery and lit a candle, and I said, I'm going to do that for you, Dennis. I'm going to light a candle. And Dennis, who is an absolute atheist, like kind of, you know, is proudly atheist, said to me, thank you. Because there's something about knowing that ritual is happening that's important. I would like more discussion amongst all of us about those rituals, because that's one of the ways I've found to cope with grief.
Thanks, Christos. And I was going to ask you more about that, and I think we can in discussion later. Alana, did you want to share that poem you mentioned?
I made the mistake of telling Jackie, because when I was thinking about ageing, I broke my foot in November 2020, just to add to what a fabulous year 2020 was. I broke my foot, and so I said to her, one of the things that it started me thinking about, because of course I was like, you know, people talk about aging and falls, and we haven't really talked about the body here, but the body is central to aging.
FYI.
So I said, oh, do you want me to read my poem, which is about, I wrote about breaking my foot, and she said yes, so I'll read it. Why not?
Go for it.
Christos has threatened to act it out. It's called The Foot Has Become the Head. I have become, of a sudden, horizontal. I have become all unwilling, bedbound. On doctor's instructions, I lay flat in the day, my limbs tickling the cliff of the mattress end. I lay still all day, my dreams sluicing new pathways through brain and tissue and blood. I have become proudly, boldly incompetent. I have become understanding, subject to, and how little I've learned from disaster, and how strangely bad habits endure, and how sadly I'm still so distracted, and how simply I sink into sorrow. I've become like an earlobe, immobile. I've become like a fashion, intolerant. Like the shells of my eyelids, my liberty blinks. Like the veils of my tear ducts, society shrinks. Like a bead on a necklace that's broken its string, I am become a body that cannot bring myself across a room. The nurse asks, that's not dirt in your toes, shaking her head at the footful of bruises. 3 metatarsals cracked like a chocolate crackle, this so vivid purple left foot. I have become of a sudden horizontal. I have become all unwilling, bedbound. Injections thin my blood, my toes tingle with anticipation, my nerves sparkle as unseen my tendons tighten, my bones harden like a silver ring, harden like a beautiful, hard thing. Don't go back, body, go forward, wait to take up your bed. For a little while longer, the foot has become the head.
Thank you. That's wonderful, Alana. And I just wanted to give a plug for the Rainbow Hub and saying our mission is to build community through connection, match people with visitors, educate people through diversity training, and advocate. We also have a wonderful writing group, so some of whom are here today, and our regular events. So please reach out to more people, share our newsletter with them, come to our events and bring someone new, and talk to someone you might not have talked to before, because we need to keep building. Alana, you sum up my notion of community superbly in the final line of Swimming Upstream. Alone we are smallish and churlish and bullish. Together we replenish and nourish and astonish. Thank you, Alana and Christos, for your rich and wide-ranging insights. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you, Jackie.